This is Ed Petke with the Americans in Wartime Experience. Today's date is June 4th, 2020. I'm conducting an interview with Mr. Jack McSherry in Reading, Pennsylvania at the Mid-Atlantic Air Museum's World War II weekend. Sir, would you please give us your full name and where you were born?
Jack L. McSherry, Jr. I was born in Shamokin, Pennsylvania.
And what war did you participate in?
World War II.
Do you have any other military veterans in your family?
Yes. My father is a career Navy man. He was retired. And my both brothers were in the Navy, World War II.
And so your dad served, obviously during World War I time.
Yes. He, for his career, he enlisted in 1907 into the Navy, and he went around the world with Theodore Roosevelt's Great White Fleet. There was 16 battleships went around the world. Took about a year and a half to do it, and that was a highlight of his life. He always liked that.
Mm-hmm. Did he ever get to meet Mr. Roosevelt?
I don't think he talked to him, but he was where he saw him, or he was in the group with him.
Right.
But he did talk to several famous admirals at the time that they were higher command, and so he did meet them.
So do you remember where you were or what you were doing when you heard about the event that would lead to your wartime experience? Obviously, it would have been the attack on Pearl Harbor.
I remember that very well. I lived in a house in the outskirts of Shamokin, and my mother and I were alone, of course, because everybody else was in the Navy. And I was in the attic. I had a homemade desk up there, and I used to spend a lot of time in the attic doing things. And my mother yelled up to me, "Jack, come on down and listen to the news." So I went downstairs, and he and the neighbor lady were there and had the radio on, talking about the attack on Pearl Harbor and going into the details. Mm-hmm. That's when I first heard about it.
What was your immediate reaction when you heard about what was going on?
I guess I was too young and dumb to get scared, mm-hmm. even from my father, who at the time was out in the ocean in the Navy. Mm-hmm. I should have thought, well, gee, I hope he's all right. Well, I think we did think that.
Right.
But no, to me it was all just something going on here that is unusual. Mm. I was young,
How old were you at the time?
I'm trying to think. That was in 45, wasn't it? I guess I was about 16.
Okay.
Yeah, I was 16. And
so in high school?
Yeah, I was in high school. I was a senior in high school.
Okay.
And I can go on with that. When on my 17th birthday, when I was finally old enough to enlist in the Navy, mm-hmm. I quit high school and enlisted in the Navy. I enlisted on my birthday.
Oh, did you?
On my 17th birthday.
Okay. So obviously Navy was going to be the way you were going to go because of your dad and your brothers.
They were all in. I wanted to go.
Uh-huh.
I did get my diploma, though.
You did get your diploma?
They gave it some girl at the graduation, and she gave it to my mother. And
okay. So how shy of graduating high school were you when you left to enlist?
I enlisted on about the middle of the month, and the graduation was at the end of the month.
So the same month?
Yeah.
Okay. So I assume a lot of young men from your town probably did the same thing. Enlisted, or
a lot of them waited. Most of them were, say, like a year older than me, mm-hmm. and they waited until they graduated. Then they enlisted in the Navy so they wouldn't get drafted in the Army.
Oh, okay. So what year? So this would have been, so Pearl Harbor was in 41. Would this have been the next year, like 42-ish time?
No, Pearl Harbor was 41,
Hmm.
and no, we were deep in the war by the time I was old enough to get in.
Okay.
And I didn't enlist until that was my birthday in March in 1945.
Okay.
So I got in near the end of the war.
Okay. And where did you do your training? Great Lakes?
No, Bainbridge.
Bainbridge, Massachusetts?
No, Maryland.
Oh, Maryland.
Yeah.
So what what was your job, and what was your what'd you go in as?
As soon as I went in, my dad was a chief quartermaster.
Uh-huh.
A quartermaster in the Navy helps with the navigation and steers the ship,
Mhm.
and that type of thing. He's
Okay.
on the bridge at all times.
Right.
And so I went to what they called quartermaster school,
Okay.
and I became a quartermaster.
Okay.
So that's what I did on the ship. I helped the navigator. I
Mhm.
steered the ship, and then of course we brought people up from the deck force to steer the ship, but I
Mhm.
watched them and make sure they did it right.
Right.
But then when things were complicated or unusual,
Mhm.
then a quartermaster would take the wheel.
Okay. And what kind of ship did you serve on?
My first one was a cruiser, the Houston,
Okay.
and later I spent several years on another cruiser, the Huntington.
And so when you went in, your first assignment is on the Houston. Do you stay stateside for a little while, or do you go
No,
right underway?
we went out into the Atlantic, and my son has a copy of the record, but on the records it lists that as being wartime or duty.
Mhm.
We went out into the Atlantic and we were trying to find German submarines.
Okay. Okay. So you were sub hunting, and did you do any escort work?
No, not during the war. I
Not
didn't
during
do.
the war.
No.
Did you find any U-boats while you were out there?
No, unfortunately, we didn't find any. But it might be interesting to cut in here. My dad, before that, earlier in the war, he spent several years in the Atlantic on a minesweeper,
Mhm.
and they were finding mines up and down the coast, and they cut them loose. They were attached by cable somehow. They'd cut the cable, then they'd shoot the mine with their 15 millimeter or 50 millimeter caliber, or 50 caliber machine gun,
Okay.
and they blow them up.
Mm. So this was along the coast of the U.S.
Yeah, out pretty far even.
Mhm.
But the U-boats were out there laying mines constantly,
Right.
and they were blowing them up constantly.
Mhm. Good to have them out there.
Yeah,
So when you were out in the Atlantic, how long would you go out at a time?
we were out for days
Okay.
because we weren't near. We were out far enough that it wasn't worth going back in and back out again.
Mhm.
We were out. I think we were out there for at least a week. I don't remember exactly, but I think we were out there for about a week trying to find German submarines. And incidentally, according to my records, that was considered wartime duty.
Sure.
So I skimmed in near the end, but officially I was in.
Mm. Wartime active.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So did you stay in the Atlantic during your whole time?
No, well, for a good portion of the time. I was in the Atlantic for about 3 years, I think, of that time. I was in for 4 years, and I got the occupation medal for occupying Europe. We occupied primarily Italy and, well, North Africa.
Okay.
And
Through the Mediterranean.
yeah,
Mhm. So when you're doing these U-boat hunting duties, when you go back, you're coming back stateside. You're not going Europe side.
no, when we were finished with that duty, whatever it was,
Mhm.
we came back to the United States. We committed Narragansett Bay, I believe, on that one in Rhode Island.
So while you're out on your patrols, you're the quartermaster. You're overseeing the steering of the ship, the navigation of the ship.
Yeah.
Do you have any other duties as far as a quartermaster goes?
No, it all links to the navigator. Whatever the navigator needed, we did it. We would make sure the charts were up to date, so we wouldn't have a bad chart that we were looking at. We would take bearings on lighthouses and buoys or anything else that was out there that we could use to determine our position.
Okay.
And I actually, with the transit, shot the sun and took bearings of the stars and for the navigator, gave it to him. So I was into the navigation mostly.
So when you're out there, are you out with a group of ships? Are you out solo?
We were mostly solo, but we were on several occasions we were out there with a task force.
Okay.
Just practicing. That was after the war stopped.
Okay. So did you have any kind of combat operations that you were a part of?
No actual combat. It was considered combat when we were hunting for the German submarine.
Right.
But we didn't combat anybody because we didn't find any German submarines.
So by that time, I guess you would assume that late in the war, maybe they weren't as many U-boats in that area?
Well, actually there were, because the high command of Germany were getting in these U-boats, going to Canada, going to Spain,
escaping,
and going down to South America to get away. They didn't want to be captured,
right?
Because a lot of them were considered war criminals.
Okay, so when you're back in port and you're not out underway, what does a quartermaster do when they're not navigation to do? There's not steering to do.
Not much of anything.
So that's your downtime?
Yeah,
so to speak.
We were responsible, like I said, to keep the charts up to date. So we might, do that, but that was a minor job for us. No, we didn't have any other assignments.
Okay. So when you went over to the Mediterranean on that leg of it, what are you doing in that area during that time?
Well, our home port was Naples, Italy. This is interesting. There was a sunken or capsized Italian cruiser at the dock. It was tied to the dock, but it was capsized. Well, they put a gangway on it, and the way we got off our ship, we walked across that cruiser to get to the dock.
Interesting.
But that was our home office the whole time we were in Italy, although we traveled all over the Mediterranean. I was in all the countries in the Mediterranean. And it might be interesting. I went to Cairo first, and then I got a bus and I went out to the Pyramid and Sphinx, which I wanted to see. And I was inside the pyramid looking around. It was dark. They didn't have any lights in there, but there were Arabs carrying torches for light. And when I come out of there, I rode a camel down to the Sphinx and took a good look at the Sphinx. And this, I don't know if this fits in, but probably many years later, my son was in college, and Zahi Hawass, who was in charge of all ancient activities in Egypt, spoke there. And he told the group that, he said, now you people are engineers and architects, and he said, I have several problems with the Sphinx. I'm afraid the head is going to break off, and there's also acid water accumulating around the base, eating the rock away. So we called him when he was in Philadelphia at the time. We called him and went to see him, and I I solved his problems. I am an engineer.
Oh, okay.
So I told him how to strengthen the neck. The neck was, the Sphinx was carved all the way up through bedrock.
Mm-hmm.
And the neck is in an area where there was not good bedrock, it was softer. And he was afraid that would break.
Mm.
So I had him drill holes all the way through the head, down through the neck and into the body, and put reinforcing bars in it, and then grout it shut.
Mm.
And that's what they did.
They did that?
Yeah, so the Sphinx's head shouldn't fall off now.
So you're responsible for the Sphinx still standing.
I did that.
You did that.
And then as far as the acid water was concerned, I had one question for him. What's different here now than when I was here? All that was there when I was there was the Sphinx and the pyramids. And he said, well, there's a development on the hill. I said, what do they have for the sewer system on site? Sewage systems. Well, that water is acid. It'll get into the sand, and everything sloped toward the Sphinx.
Oh.
And that's where the acid water was come from. So they put a sewer system in that town.
Solve that problem.
Yeah, so I solved both of his problems. It was interesting. I just thought it was unusual that I got to do something with the Sphinx.
Right. So many years after actually being there as a young man.
Yeah.
Outstanding. Did you ever go up into the Black Sea area?
Black Sea? No.
No, never.
We went the full length of the Mediterranean, and that's pretty well stops at Alexandria, Egypt.
Mm-hmm.
That's where we moored to the dock, but that's as far east as I went.
Okay.
I was in other parts of North Africa. I was in, I can't even remember the names of the countries now. But
like Morocco and those places all over there.
Yeah, I was in Morocco, and I don't know why I can't think of this other one, but my memory gets a little short now and then.
Understandable. So this would have been at the end of the war, so more of during the occupation phase of the end of the war? Yeah,
that was right after the war was over, and we were there as occupiers.
Okay. So do you remember where you were when you heard that the first atomic bomb was dropped?
Yeah, I was still, that was in August. No, I was in the Navy at the time.
Mm-hmm.
I was visiting my dad. He happened to be in Bainbridge at the same time that I was in Bainbridge.
Uh-huh.
So I walked over to his area and was visiting him, and that's when we heard it on the radio that the atomic bomb was dropped.
What did you guys think about that when you heard that news?
Well, actually, we were glad, because we knew it would end the war.
Mm-hmm.
And I do have some comments about that. People criticize it, but that dropping those two bombs saved lives, because the Japanese would not surrender. If they surrendered, they were no longer human in their culture.
Mm-hmm.
So that war would have went on, and we would have invaded Japan.
Mm-hmm.
I was scheduled to be part of the invasion forces, and we'd have been met on the shore by women, children, grandpas, and army. And it's an island. We'd have probably been invading all the way around, they'd been killing us, and we'd have been killing them. And I really think that even though the atomic bombs killed a lot of people, there would have been more people killed in the invasion of Japan.
Yeah.
So it wasn't a bad thing. I mean, after all, they attacked us.
Right.
Yeah.
It only goes, and you're right. I mean, they had said long that surrender was never an option in their culture.
No.
Fight to the last man, woman, or child, and like you said, it literally would have been women, children, and that's something. Did that ever cross your mind about how you would have to grapple with having to fight women, children?
I don't know how I'd react. I am sort of soft-hearted. I don't think I could hurt a little kid. Maybe a woman, I don't know, but right. I could never hurt a little kid.
It's almost unwarlike when you think about that. You know? You think of men go to fight war, at least back in those days, and women and children were they were spared, or they were
Right.
supposed to have been spared.
Yeah.
So it would have been. I'm sure you're not the only one. That it would have been a difficult thing to come to grips with if
Yeah.
that had been that.
Yeah.
So do you? So obviously while you were in the European War ended first.
Yeah.
Do you recall the European War ending or
Yeah.
how that?
I was also, the one was in June. I was in boot camp. I just enlisted, several months before that happened. Yeah, so I remember that. And the other one was after I was out of boot camp, but I was still in Bainbridge, Maryland, and that's where I visited my dad and heard the news.
Did you? So you never made it over to the Pacific. Actually, that was the plan. However, did you ever actually go over?
Not during the war, but I went 500 miles into the Pacific in my later years in the Navy.
Okay. So how long did you stay in the Navy?
I was in for 4 years.
For 4 years. Okay. What was your impression of the Pacific Navy side as opposed to the Atlantic Navy side?
Well, I didn't see much of the Pacific side. It was all warm weather. We'd go out and anchor at some deserted island. Some of them we went ashore, some we didn't. So we didn't do much. We were just taking the ship out for a run. And the Atlantic, I saw the Atlantic when it was smooth. I saw the Atlantic when there was 30-foot waves. That's where I got washed overboard.
So you went overboard once?
Almost.
Okay. What happened with that?
Well, I had to go on duty on the bridge at midnight, and we were out at sea, and I had to go to the bridge to take care of the helmsman, and we wrote the ship's log, but we spent 4 hours in the pilot house or on the open bridge, but we were in the bridge for our entire 4-hour watch. So I got up at about 11:30. I had to be up on the bridge at a 11:45. And I went up the top side, and we were still rolling about 30 degrees. And the sky was still black, even though it was midnight, but it was black. So the storm was still going full blast. And there I am all by myself, going up the ladders toward the bridge. And I was just fascinated looking at it. But I went down and walked out on the main deck, which is the dumb thing to do. But I walked out on the main deck, and I heard a crash. I was looking up at the big waves. I heard a crash at the bow of the ship, and I knew a wave broke across the bow, and the water would run back along the deck. So I ran to get inside, and I didn't get there. Oh, no. The water was up here on me and carried me toward the side, and the ship was rolling. And I was going over, and I grabbed the cable.
Oh, man.
I was already hanging over the edge, but I grabbed the cable, and I pulled myself back on, and I went inside and went up to the bridge.
Big sigh of relief.
Yeah. Well, it didn't scare me as much as it should have, because if I'd have gone over, I'd have gone there. They wouldn't have missed me they'd been mad at me another half hour because I was late for getting there. That by several hours later, they start wondering where I am, but I'd have been miles behind by that time. But
thank God for that cable being there. Where it was.
Yeah.
Was that your only close call?
Well, it's interesting you should ask that. I walked through a minefield. When I would go ashore on Liberty, all the other crew members would go to the nearest bar. I didn't drink.
Okay.
I just go in whatever town we were in. I'd walk over that whole city. Just every port we were in, I walked all over it. And we were in Trieste. And Trieste had trouble with Yugoslavia and Italy fighting over them. So they were fighting. So the border between the two countries was mined, and I didn't know that. But we were, of course, told not to go across the border into Yugoslavia. That was our instructions when we went ashore. Well, I was hiking along, and I went across the border, and I realized then that I was in Yugoslavia and I shouldn't be there, so I turned around, went back across the line again.
Right.
And 40 years later, my son's watching a historic show on television. They were talking about Trieste and their problems with Yugoslavia.
Mm-hmm.
And they said, and they are just now removing the mines from the border.
He said, there were mines there?
Yeah, they didn't tell me.
Right, sure. So obviously no border guards,
nobody. It was just
soft border.
It was just like a farming area, a country area. I was on a dirt road.
Yeah.
And I walked across the border, and we weren't supposed to. Wasn't even supposed to be there. I wasn't supposed to be in Yugoslavia. Right. It was all right for me to be in Italy taking a walk.
Right.
But I wasn't supposed to cross the line. I didn't even know I crossed the line until I was in Yugoslavia. And this is Yugoslavia. And I got out of there.
Turn around and go back.
So I did go across the minefield twice. That wasn't warfare. That was dumbness. And
you can look back at that now and say, "Man, I was dumb back then, wasn't I?"
I just have to show you this now.
Mm-hmm. The many dumb things that I did in my life for your reading pleasure. That's a pretty thick book.
You can have that. My daughter suggested I write a book about the dumb things I did, and I laughed at her. I said, I could never fill a book with that. And then I started. I think there's about 130 some pages in there, and each page is a dumb thing that I did.
Man, I could probably write one twice as thick as this one. Oh man. So, what when you said you would hit a port, you'd go out and explore. What was your favorite country that you were in and got to explore?
Oh, probably the most fabulous and interesting, because it was so different, was Egypt.
Okay.
At the pyramids and the Sphinx, and I went in a factory where they make fezzes, and I wore it back to the ship took my white hat off and wore the red one in.
Uh-huh.
And that was probably the most interesting. Even there I got in trouble.
In Egypt?
Yeah, we were anchored to the dock, and our transportation into the town was either to walk or to take a taxi.
Mm-hmm.
And but we were told if we go through the Arab quarters into downtown, go in groups of 5.
Uh-huh.
And I was with another guy, and I said, we don't need 5. So we walked through the Arab district, just the 2 of us. We were accosted. I felt something hit my leg. Looked down, there was an egg splattered there, and an old guy came running over and wiped it up. Then he stood up and he said, I want a tip. I want American money. I want all of your money. And I just sort of looked at me, a little guy, I was going to belt him. But then I looked around, we were completely surrounded, very, very mean-looking Arabs. So I didn't give them the money, but what we did, there was an Egyptian came in with a wagon, and we jumped on his wagon, and he hauled us down. Then he wanted a lot of money for rescuing us. We jumped off of the wagon and went into town. So I got in trouble disobeying orders. We were supposed to go in groups of 5 or more if we walked, and as usual, I didn't pay attention. We went with 2.
One of the many dumb things you did in your life?
It's in there. Yeah.
Did you find that when you went, aside from the Arabs accosting you, did you find that when you went into these countries, it's towards the war end or at the end of the war, how were you looked upon or received? Was there welcoming? Was it resentment? Was it?
No, I didn't run into any resentment at all. They treated us well. A lot of people were out to sell us something. Mm-hmm. We had a lot of them, and of course they were friendly to us.
Right.
Well, they had an ulterior motive. But if you'd go in a restaurant or something, they'd treat you real nice. Mm-hmm. Italy, the people were friendly. France, the people were extremely friendly. And Egypt, I didn't spend a lot of time in the cities. I went out with my time. I was out at the pyramids and Sphinx. When I come back by bus and then a train back up to
Right.
where the ship was.
Yeah. So were you able to keep in touch with family and friends back home while you were overseas?
Yeah, I'd write letters and they'd write letters. Mail was extremely slow. It would take a letter from the United States about a month to get to the ship.
Wow.
And if we were out at sea, a helicopter would come over and drop a bag of mail on the deck, and then they'd give it to us. So I didn't get a lot of mail, but yeah, I was in contact.
But that's a nice welcome, almost a hug from home when you see that letter with your name on it.
Yeah, everybody, we'd stand around and they'd call out names because they passed out the mail.
Mm-hmm.
And some of the guys were disappointed, no mail for me today. And I usually got a mail, but not always.
Mm-hmm. Aside from going out and sightseeing, seemed to be what you really like to do, is go out and see these countries. Was there anything else that you did while you were in port or in downtime? Guys get on a baseball team, they play basketball, sports, cards. What were the other things you kind of like to do to keep yourself busy?
No, I was pretty much of a loner.
Mm-hmm.
If I was most of the time, I'd go ashore by myself. Now they had what was it? I guess it was a Red Cross in downtown Italy where we could go in and got free drinks and free food, and so I used to stop in there and get something to eat and something to drink. But when I'd leave there, they had a place there where you could buy containers of popcorn. So I bought a container of popcorn and walked out the front door, and there was a whole bunch of kids out there that wanted popcorn, so I gave it to them.
Oh, nice.
But they probably, fighting over it, they probably spilled it all over the ground. I don't know.
You became their best friend that day.
Yeah.
You gave them the popcorn.
Yeah.
So you said about how long were you Europe Pacific? You're about a year over there, year or two.
We came home for a short time in between. We were over in Italy at Naples, our home port.
Mm-hmm.
We were over there twice. The first time was a little over a year, and the second time I think was about 8 months.
Mm-hmm.
But then we'd come back to the United States.
Right. So being in the Navy, obviously, would have been the first time you had left home. You'd left the United States any great distance.
It was the first time I left the United States. I visited almost all the main cities in Europe. Well, we didn't go up to Germany,
Okay.
but we were in Italy. I was, in all the cities there, and we were in France. Of course, we went over into North Africa,
Mm-hmm.
and that's when we were.
And those areas would have still been very war damaged.
Oh yeah.
What's your impression of what are you thinking about when you see all this destruction and all this devastation over there?
Well, I knew it was there, and when they did it, I was glad they did it because they were the enemy.
Mm-hmm.
But going over and seeing it afterwards, I guess you think, wow, people are going to have a lot of rebuilding to do here.
Mm-hmm.
So I was a little sympathetic. I was in cities where a lot of buildings were destroyed or damaged at least.
Mm-hmm.
And then I went to, I think what was it called? A city at western Italy. It was completely destroyed. It was just a pile of brick rubble.
Mm.
That's all that was left. Nothing even standing up anymore. It was bombed constantly.
Mm-hmm.
So that was the worst I saw. Otherwise, it was just buildings were gone.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess there was a lot of people killed, but we didn't see them.
Right. And I guess the locals, they're resolved to rebuild and to continue.
Yeah, they had to. They wouldn't have had anything if they didn't rebuild.
Yeah. Right.
Now Naples, I don't remember seeing a lot of damage in Naples, but I was in Trieste and Florence.
Mm-hmm.
There was damage in all those countries,
Right. Right.
or all those cities. I mean.
Mm-hmm. So, can you describe what how long before you got out of the Navy, were you leaving the Navy while you were still over in Europe, or had you come home already?
No, I was transferred off of the ship pretty late in the war. Well, I guess I had a year to go yet.
Mm-hmm.
I was transferred from the ship to land duty, and which I didn't like too much. But then within a week or so, they assigned me to another ship.
Okay.
But the other ship was down in Panama.
Oh.
So they sent me down there on a Navy transport ship.
Mm-hmm.
And then I went aboard the Orion, which is a submarine tender.
Okay.
And I was on that ship for a year. And we came up to the United States twice. Of course, went through the canal twice then, which I got to steer the ship through the canal.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. And so that was about it. But down in Panama, I used to go to the city almost every time I get off the ship.
Mm-hmm.
I had to walk a while, but then I took a bus in there. And finally I found out that there was ruins of an old city that was burned by the pirates in the 1600s nearby. So I took the bus out to the outline of the city, and then I walked to the way out to the ruins and walked all around them. So that was an attraction for me.
Mm-hmm.
And then I used to go out there periodically, and then I started renting a horse instead of walking. I'd ride a horse out there and ride around in the ruins on the horse.
Very cool. And the canal was relatively new at that time.
Not too new. I think it was built in 1903. And that's
Okay.
Well, that was when I was down in Panama. When the heck was that? 1948, 49. I was down there. No, 47 and 48. I was down there.
And the Panamanians were very possessive and very protective of that canal. Did you find any issues with Panama?
No, I saw no problems at all about the canal. Of course, I guess we didn't talk about the canal much, but
right.
I'd go over into the town, and it was just like any other town. The people were friendly, friendly enough. Maybe not all of them were friendly.
Right.
And I didn't do much in town except walk around and look at things.
Yeah.
But then when I started going out, then I even found something else. I found out you could take a small boat. Somebody was running the boat, take me out to this little island out there, which is sort of like a resort area in their way. Yeah. And I'd rent a cabin there and stay there overnight. Mm-hmm. And a friend of mine went out. The two of us went out this one time, and we rented a canoe, and we saw an island out there. We decided we're going, or not a canoe, a rowboat. And we got into a rowboat, and we rowed out to that, and it was forever. We weren't getting any closer, you know. And we were there for just a short time. And we were swimming around. It was nice, clear water, perfectly clear. Then we decided to go back, get our boat, and head back. And we came back. The tide had gone out, and our boat was way up on the land. Well, it wasn't bad. We drug it across the sand and got it back out. But me being a quartermaster, I should have known better. We didn't check for the tide because we were lucky. In Panama, the difference in tide is 20 feet. And if that tide would have come in instead of out, it would have floated our boat away. We didn't tie it down or anything. We just put it there. So that's in the dumb books.
That'd have been a story. That'd been some explaining to do.
Yeah. Yeah, we'd have had to somehow get word to somebody. Well, there was an old building there, like a cabin, but it was all falling apart. I think back maybe I would have had enough sense to make a raft and row
Like a castaway.
Yeah, row our way back.
Right. So when you're on a submarine tender, what is the job of a submarine tender?
A submarine tender takes care of, in our case, it was 8 submarines. They were moored to the dock alongside of us, 4 there and 4 over here. And any maintenance they did, we would do it for them. Okay. We had every machine that you can think of, and foundry and everything else on that ship. We could have built a submarine. That's what we had on there. It was a big, heavy ship, 30,000 tons, and it was sort of a clunky ship. And we didn't go out very often. And me being on a cruiser, cruising along at full speed in the Atlantic, and getting on a thing like that and crawling along. Matter of fact, we were embarrassed. We were in a convoy. They put a group of ships together to go together. We were just playing around. It was after the war. And then from the flagship, we got the order to go to flank speed, which is full speed. We said, we're already doing flank speed, sir. We were doing 15. That was as fast as we could go. So they went along ahead without us.
So can't give it any more power, sir.
I wasn't that pleased with it, but I was all right. I was there on that ship for a year, and it was all right.
So you pretty much, you would follow wherever the submarines went. If they changed locations, would you go with them? No,
we didn't go with them. We stayed in port, but if they needed help, we'd go to where they were. Okay. Or mostly, if they needed repairs, we'd do it while right there on the dock. Okay.
So if you're not so you're still a quartermaster at the time.
Yeah.
If the ship is not moving a lot, is the quartermaster really?
We had
still doing the messages.
And I didn't think about that when I was telling you later. Yeah, we did. We did get one duty whenever we were in port. When you're in port, you're moored to the dock, and then there's a gangway goes to get off the ship, and there was always a watch crew there. There was an officer in charge, then there was a quartermaster, and there was a messenger, sometimes a boatswain's mate. We stood 4-hour watches there at the gangway, and we had to do that. That was part of our assignment, stand a quartermaster's watch on the gangway. I forgot about that.
So, all right, so when you went down to Panama you said it was all about a year?
I was there exactly a year to the day.
So was that your last assignment before you got out?
When I came back from there, I went to Norfolk and was discharged.
Okay. When you came home to Norfolk and you got discharged, was there a sense of something missing or a loss of not being in the military anymore? What was it like separating from the military?
Oh, actually, I was relatively happy to get out and get back to normal life. I don't think I had any real regrets. It was a good experience. You know, I put 4 years in the Navy, partly in the end of the war, and the rest of it on a lot of it traveling. I did a lot of traveling.
See the world.
Earlier, you said something about traveling out of the United States. Yeah. When I was 9 years old, we lived in Shamokin, Pennsylvania. My father was retired from the Navy. We went in our car, a 36 Lafayette. We drove west across southern United States. We went into Mexico. We went up through California, all the way up through Oregon, Washington State, came back along the north, went up into Canada, and came back. We did all that. A road trip. We did all that during the Great Depression.
Ah.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
So.
And I was 9 years old when the whole family went. My 2 brothers, my mother and I, and Dad and I.
So you were old enough, obviously, to remember what it was like during the Great Depression.
Oh yeah.
Can you give a sense of what life was like during that time?
I should have brought one of my other books. I wrote a book about the Great Depression as seen through a child's eyes. We were happy. Maybe the parents, my parents never seemed to have any problems though. My dad
Mm.
always had, when he didn't have work, he had a Navy check coming in. He was retired from the Navy, so
Okay.
we I don't think we had any problems that way.
Okay.
And as kids, we had fun. We were happy all the time. We'd do all kind of go up in the woods or climb the top of the mountain or play baseball, and we were always doing something. And yeah, we were happy. So looking at it from a kid's point of view, the depression was no problem whatsoever.
Right.
It was to a lot of people. I know my dad used to give some of the neighbors. There was one neighbor that had a whole bunch of kids, and they were rather poor. And he used to go grocery shopping, and he'd always bring a bag along to took it down to them.
Right.
He was good at that. He'd help people.
Different time.
Yeah.
When people did that more.
Yeah.
But you know, of course, if you were going through hard times, your parents would never have shown that.
No, they wouldn't have admitted it, but I could tell. I was big enough to know what was going on,
Mm-hmm.
and we always had food. We never had any problems in any way.
Mm-hmm.
And
So when the war begins, obviously there was rationing. Do you recall all the rationing and?
that I do remember. That was a problem. We had during World War II. We had rationing of coffee, which didn't bother me too much, and meat, and let's see. There's a lot of things that were certain things were rationed.
Right. Sugar and
but we
metals.
we survived that.
Mm-hmm. Were there any? You know, they always had the rationing drives in these towns where you'd collect all the metal and do you remember doing any of that?
Yeah.
Kind of stuff?
This friend of my dad's, he was an interesting man. He was a superintendent of a cemetery. He was also a stonemason, and he built his house near our house out of tombstones.
Oh wow!
He was a mason, stonemason. He just cut them up and built it.
That's an interesting story.
Yeah. So he had a pickup truck, and he used to pick us up when we were kids, and we'd go around the countryside and knock on doors and get any metal they had for the scrap drive, especially aluminum. The people they wanted aluminum at the time,
Right.
and I remember people bringing out their pots and pans and things, and stuff that they were using, like a big pot of aluminum pot. They'd give it to us. We'd throw it back in the truck, and it was melted down and used in the military somehow. So we did that.
And I'm sure as a child or as a kid, that was fun. Hey, let's go out and.
Yeah, we rode in the back of the truck. You know, he was in the cab. Maybe one of the kids sat up front with him, but the rest was in the back. And when we'd stop somewhere, we'd get out and go around knocking on doors. And
nice.
yeah, we collected a lot of scrap.
So when you discharged out of the military, what did you do when you got out of the Navy?
I went back to my same job that I had before I went in Navy. I cut the grass and did miscellaneous work in the cemetery for the same guy.
Mm-hmm.
And I worked in the cemetery, and then I got my two brothers were in college in Indiana, taking up engineering, one electrical, one mechanical, and my one brother wrote a letter to me, and he said, "Why don't you come out here and take civil engineering?" He said, "That's the easiest." So I went out, I signed up for civil engineering, and I am a civil engineer.
Okay.
I've been a civil engineer since 1952.
And what is a civil engineer? What does that entail?
Almost anything that's built is designed by an engineer. Like it can be a road, or it can be a bridge, it can be a building. And for the last, since 75, I've been self-employed, and my son is also a civil engineer. He does most of the work now, but we both were doing civil engineering, and we were doing like storm drainage for design for new developments. We were doing buildings, and we do structural design primarily, and we still do primarily structural design. He goes into town, and people have him they have a problem with the house somehow, and he tells
Okay.
them how to fix it. And I I designed. There was a foundry near where we lived, and it burned down. And of course, we were engineers. They called us while the building was still burning, and we went in and were telling the firemen, don't go over there. That roof is about ready to collapse."
Okay.
And when then we're finished with it, the building was completely destroyed.
Mm.
I designed a new foundry for them, twice as big, and yeah, I did all the structural design for it.
Okay. So would you, I guess, contract work, you would do private stuff? Would you also work for like a town or a city on
Anybody,
municipalities?
yeah, anybody that called me, it could be for an individual. Usually, it was for contractors or for municipalities. I did a lot of miscellaneous work. I did a lot of structural design, but I also did a lot of stormwater design, and that kept me very busy. So we still operate. I don't do as much anymore. I'm getting too dumb. But my brother, my son, and he's very, very busy. Structural design and yeah. So my brother, he did all right saying take civil engineering. It fit me like a glove. I fit right in as a civil engineer. Yeah.
Enjoyed it.
Yeah.
Very good. So how has your wartime experience affected your life?
The first thing that affected my life is my dad. 6 months, I think it was, before Pearl Harbor, he was called back. And of course, I didn't like that.
Right.
But I survived with it. And he, part of the time he was in Philadelphia, part of the time he was in Bainbridge, but then he was out on the minesweeper. Then we didn't see him as much. But when he was in nearby, he used to come home weekends. But when he went out to sea, then he didn't get home as often.
Sure.
But yeah, that bothered me. But otherwise, I guess most by the time I got old enough to give a hoot, most of the news was good news. You know, the Japanese were being backed up. First they chased us all the way down to Australia, then we chased them back.
Right.
And so, you know, that we were winning the war for most of my memory. And so and the rationing didn't really bother me. I don't know. I'm trying to think of what else happened that. Well, we couldn't get gas. You know, you couldn't. Yeah, you couldn't do things like that. But
right. But I'm sure people didn't seem to mind because they knew what the bigger picture and the greater good was. It was all for the war effort.
Yeah, there was very few people complained.
A lot different than today.
I remember my uncle did complain at one time. He was a real nice guy. He wasn't a complainer. But he needed 4 tires for his car, and he couldn't get them. And that upset him a little bit. But
yeah. So what advice or what would you have to say for a young man or woman who wants to enter into military service today? What would you say to that, someone like that?
Well, some people might want to do it for a good reason. Some want to do it for the adventure. Some want to do it just to be patriotic. But myself, I wouldn't recommend it. I mean, if you can live a good life at home, that's better than living a military life under direction of others.
Yeah.
You know, we were treated all right. I didn't have any problems when I was in the Navy. All was well, and yeah. So no, I wouldn't necessarily. If somebody asked me whether they should join the Navy or not, I'd say, well, you better check it out thoroughly and be sure what you're doing. Find out what it's really like, especially before you sign up for 4 years like I did.
Yeah. kind of stuck in there.
Yeah. So it depends on the person. It can be a career. My dad was in the military most of his life. He was happy. Well, he was the kind of guy that could take anything. Nothing bothered him.
Mm-hmm. So let's say future generation, your great grandchildren are going to watch this video one day. What's one thing that you would like them to know about your military service?
Well, I went in the Navy because I desperately wanted to. I wanted to be in the Navy because everybody else was going in the military, and of course my dad, my two brothers were in the Navy, and I wanted to be a hero too, you know.
Mm-hmm.
That's about what it was. And so I don't regret that. You know, I did what I wanted to do. Maybe the last year or two it was starting to get old hat, and I sort of, I gotta get out of here, you know. But I still did my job and was happy. I didn't complain. I just was thinking, well, I only have 2 years to go yet.
Right.
So to tell them what to do about the military, who knows what the military will be like in those days, for one thing, and just think about it before you do it, that's all.
Right. Did your duty, proud to do your duty?
What's that?
Did you proud to have done your duty? You did, you know, you served well.
Yeah, actually, I was one of the best quartermasters on a ship. I'm not bragging. I did my job thoroughly and properly, and matter of fact, one time the officer of the deck, he was on an open bridge above the pilot house, and I was in the pilot house, and he yelled down through a voice tube. He wanted to know what direction the wind was blowing and what the velocity of the wind was. So I looked out the porthole, and I saw the white caps on the waves.
Mm-hmm.
When there's white caps appearing, your velocity of the wind is 23 knots. And I knew that. And then they were just starting to break. And I looked at the compass and compared it with where the direction. So I told them, I gave them a bearing and a velocity instantly. I just looked out the porthole and yelled it right back. And he yelled back down, "Do it right." So I had to do it right. I had to calculate it. And we had a calculating procedure. You take into consideration the speed of the ship, how it was affecting it. I calculated out. A few minutes later, I yelled the same numbers up to him.
Did it right.
Yeah. I was very proud of that.
Oh, yeah. I mean, if you have a job, might as well do it the best you can, right?
Yeah. I did. I did my job properly. I was a good helmsman, and all the officers knew that. You know, they knew when I was on the wheel or doing something that it was going to be done right. I had the reputation.
Is there anything else you'd like to talk about that I didn't ask, or we didn't talk about? Anything else you'd like to document about your experiences? Well,
it might be interesting. I got a little story to tell you about my brother, Bill. He was the oldest brother, the first one to go in. He was in the Battle of Okinawa, which was a very brutal battle. And the kamikazes, there was 3,000 Japanese airplanes coming in and diving on. They weren't just dropping bombs, they were diving on the ships and blowing themselves up. They were full of explosives, and they were blowing up the ships and sinking them. And my brother was there for that. And this one time, I guess there was no fighting going on for a while, and he was down he was several decks over that way, and his battle station was, he had to come up, over, and down, and he was in the mess hall. That's what they were eating. And so when they yelled general quarters, everybody got up and ran, headed for their battle stations. He gathered up all the chocolate cake and had a handful of chocolate cake, and then he went to his quarters, and by the time he got up here and over there and down, he couldn't get in. They had it all battened down. So he sat up on the main deck, sitting up against the outside bulkhead, eating his chocolate cake, and the Japanese planes were flying over. He said one flew right over the plane. He could see the pilot in it.
Oh, man.
Yeah, and he was sitting there eating his chocolate cake.
During the battle.
Yeah.
That's too much. That's too much. All right. Well, Mr. McSherry, on behalf of the Americans in Wartime Experience, and myself personally, I'd like to thank you for your service.
Yeah.
I'd like to thank you for sitting down and speaking with us today.